Reverend Shane Bishop is the senior pastor of Christ Church in Fairview Heights, Illinois. How many of you have been to that church before? Several of you. So you've got some names to remember back there, okay? Christ Church was recognized by Outreach magazine as being one of the 100 fastest growing churches in the United States for 2018. Christ Church weekend attendance worship has increased from 200 to 2,500 since Shane's appointment in 1997, and it's grown for 22 consecutive years. Christ Church offers 8 worship services each week, has a significant online presence, and has 3 regional campuses in addition to the main campus in Fairview Heights, Illinois. Named a Distinguished Evangelist of the United Methodist Church in 2010, Shane holds both graduate and undergraduate degrees from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. He's an elder in the Illinois Great Rivers Conference, graduated with honors from Candler School of Theology at Emory University. He and his wife, Melissa, have 2 adult children and 4 grandchildren, and he is one of the nicest guys I've ever met. Very easy to work with as a speaker, and we're really glad to have him here this morning. So would you please welcome with me Reverend Shane Bishop.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be with you. I was here for, I believe, your Student Life Week? Christian Life Week last year, and I really enjoyed that. So good to see some of you again. I'm going to read the text. It is from Mark 4. I'll begin with verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking in the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. And the disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Some translations there say, "Peace, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped and there was a great calm. And he asked them, "Why were you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And the disciples were terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." My daughter Lydia was a joy to raise in high school and until most of it. And she was just the apple of my eye. She was the kid that would call you when I was in meetings. And she would call and she'd say, "Daddy, I really need your help." And I'd say, "What's wrong, kid?" She said, "Well, I'm getting gas and I'm locked out of my car and it's running and I need you to come." Lyd was always just a joy to raise, just always so much fun, and I never knew what I was going to get. But one thing we had in common, we both had to have the last word. Does anybody here just have to have the last word? Well, we both did. I mean, when we would get into conflicts, which was mainly on days ending with Y, we would get into it and we just couldn't seem to exit the conflict. There was no dismount for this routine where we could exit the conflict. And finally, her junior year in high school, she came up with this brilliant idea. She said, "Daddy, do you know how we both always have to have the last words?" And I said, "Possibly. I know how you need to have the last word." She goes, "Well, I've got it." She goes, "Anytime that we're stuck in this loop film, we both together will count to 3, and then we'll scream as loud as we can, and then we both get the last word, and we have to part immediately." So we would do it. We'd get an argument. She'd go, "Okay." And we go, 1, 2, 3, ah! And we would leave. It works. You should try this with your parents. It actually worked. It was brilliant. The last word, keep it in mind. We'll roll back. Most scholars assume John Mark wrote this book for early Christians in Rome. But we can be quite sure it was written to the non-Jewish portion of the church. By the time this book was written, there were exponentially more Gentile Christians than there were Jewish Christians. And if you read Mark carefully, he leaves out things that would be important to Jews, and he explains things that any ancient Jew would have known. We know this book was written either at or near the end of the reign of Nero. Nero took the throne in 54 AD. He succeeded Claudius, if you guys know anything about the utterly bizarre Claudius, and brilliant. Throughout his reign, he boasted some accomplishment, but he's a tyrant. And he has this penchant for opulence. It led to a coup in 68 AD, and he committed suicide, thus going the way of many Roman emperors. When Nero was accused of starting the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, he branded Christians as the instigators, and he unleashed this season of severe and sadistic persecution throughout the empire. Now, we've all heard about Christians being thrown to the animals in the Colosseum, but there are some lesser known stories. The painting you see behind me was painted in 1877 by the Polish artist Heinrich Siemiradzki. It depicts Rome after the Great Fire. And if you look, it's all classes, they're all together. But if you take a look at the torches, they are Christians, they're humans who had been rolled in pitch. And they lit them. And those were the torches at the Garden of Nero. Rome was a hot mess, and Christians were the scapegoats on the spit. Mark wrote to offer hope, strength, and courage to a persecuted church. And if you don't get that, you really don't get a lot of Mark. He portrays a Jesus who suffered and conquered suffering, who died and conquered death. He portrays a Jesus who is both afflicted by the evil forces of this world and yet has the power over them, who faced life's storms and calmed them. He generally puts Peter's stories and recollections into writing, and he offers the Gentile Christian world a cogent biography of Christ. Now, by any definition, Christianity is growing rapidly on one hand and taking a pounding from the Roman Empire on the other. So Mark is writing to people like you and me in really difficult times to offer hope and strength and courage. It is not just a biography. It's written to encourage suffering Christians. Now he opens by offering the baptism, the temptation, and the calling of the disciples. Then Jesus begins his ministry in a fishing village called Capernaum, which would have had about 1,500 residents at the time. His initial ministry is defined by teaching, casting out evil spirits. He's in the synagogue. He heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law. And soon these crowds are just following Jesus everywhere he goes. He goes throughout the region and they bring sick and demon-possessed people to them. Jesus then leaves Capernaum for outdoor venues. And he begins to travel, and he establishes further legitimacy by curing a man with leprosy and a paralyzed man. You need to understand, these are two things no one could cure. This isn't a small thing. This is huge. No one else could do what Jesus was doing. And we probably do well to think of Jesus in this phase as a touring band, like a regional band that's really popular, that goes every night and plays music somewhere to big venues, small venues, indoor, outdoor, just on the verge of becoming national. Jesus is on tour, and he is the hottest ticket in Galilee. Next, Jesus chooses the rest of his disciples. He catches the critical eye of the religious establishment, and he begins to shift from John the Baptist's apocalyptic style of preaching to the more parabolic style that we're more familiar with. So rather than looking at our text today as purely a man versus nature motif, I want to suggest to you that it's also a metaphor for suffering people of faith. Folks like you and me, when we're going through bad times, when we feel like the world is against us, I want to share you the big idea, and then I'll argue it. The big idea is simply this: Jesus gets the last word. Jesus gets the last word. In 1986, there were two fishermen on the Sea of Galilee. It was a drought. They saw something protruding from the mud. It turns out to be the hull of a first century fishing boat. It's precisely the kind of boat that is talked about in this passage. And no one's saying Jesus rode in this boat, but they are saying this boat was on the Sea of Galilee when Jesus would have been riding on boats in the sea. It's a wooden boat. It was in service for about 100 years. The high wear parts are constantly being replaced and repaired. There's actually 12 different kinds of local woods in this. They sort of just keep a boat on the water and they just keep repairing it and shoving it back in. Let me tell you about this boat. It's 27 feet long. It's 7.5 feet wide. It has a shallow bottom. It can be sailed with a single mast, or you can have 4 oarsmen that can row it. You need a crew of 5 to make this boat work. So one of the things I get thinking is, okay, how many people could you get in it? Well, now you could probably get 6. But what about in first century Israel? We know from skeletons in first century Israel that the average male in the time of Christ would have been about 5'5" and weighed about 140 pounds. So people were just simply littler back there. So a boat like that could transport 15 men of that size, or it's enough room for 12 men and 1 to lay down. There's 1 first-class seat on the boat. Now we have an idea about the boat. Let's take a look at the action sequence. Verse 35, as evening came, Jesus said, let's cross to the other side of the lake. Jesus is trending. He's a local celebrity. Everywhere he goes, there's crowds that follow him. They are relentless. Some came to hear him teach. Others brought loved ones desperate for a miracle. But the bottom line is this: Jesus could do what no one else could do. He could give people their lives back. And it's what he did over and over and over, and it's why people flocked to him. You never knew what was going to happen when Jesus showed up. I've been to Israel 7 times. I'll be going back in January. I love the Sea of Galilee, and it offers this collection of natural amphitheaters. And if you choose to stand in the shallows and you preach with the wind behind you, you kind of have this natural sound system, and people can hear you from a really long way away. But you have to pick your spot, and that spot is always going to be moving. Jesus had been teaching all day, but the text says he's tired. So he gets in a boat. Verse 36, Jesus got in the boat and they left the crowds behind. Now, one of the things that's overlooked about Jesus is that he took care of himself. He often spent times in prayer and solitude, and when he had expended all the energy he had to give, he left the crowds, and he would always go somewhere and rest up. Verse 37, soon a fierce storm arose, and the high waves filled the boat with water. The Sea of Galilee is not a sea, it's a lake. It's 700 feet below sea level. It is the lowest freshwater lake in the world. To the west, north, and east, it's surrounded by mountains. It gets pretty hot on the ground, but the air can get cooler in the mountains, and it tends to tumble. And you can get quick thunderstorms, like you can on any lake, but you can get quick thunderstorms. But because the wind blows through mountain tunnels, it's sort of like sticking your thumb on the end of a water hose. It just sort of squirts through there. So the wind can get bad, and it can get bad really, really quickly. Of an evening, and I'm guessing Jesus is just shot. Have you ever just been exhausted? I remember in college after finals, you just run and run and run, and then I was just always like, I slept for 2 weeks. You know, I would come up like for 30 minutes for pizza, but you were just so tired, just so incredibly tired. Jesus is just depleted here. Verse 38, he's sleeping in the back of the boat. The disciples awaken him. Don't you care that we're about to drown? Many years ago, I was on an evangelistic outreach to the Indianapolis 500. We went down to Georgetown Street the night before the Indianapolis 500 race, and we were sharing faith in the middle of a really, really rough crowd. We went on this great big Trailways bus, and we were staying in a church, and we finally got off the street. It had been a pretty rough night. The crowd was rowdy. We got off the street, and we were going into the church to sleep. And someone said, we need somebody to sleep on the bus to protect it. I get looking around me, man, and it is clear. I need out of the bunkhouse. We've got about 7 guys there could snore the paint off a wall. And I'm just thinking I would rather be anywhere than here. So I volunteered to go sleep on the bus. Well, the next morning, I awakened, and there were some guys banging on the door of the bus. He said, are you all right? Are you all right? And I said, well, sure, fine. Why? Well, they said all night people were throwing things at the bus, and at one point they were rocking the bus back and forth and they almost tumped it over. So what I can tell you is it's possible to sleep through that. It is. It's possible to sleep through that because it did. Jesus is asleep. There is a huge storm that's blowing, and Jesus is sound asleep. The two Greek words used to describe the storm, one of the Greek words is often used for the effects of an earthquake, and the other means a tower. So this is a shaking, life-threatening storm. Verse 39, Jesus rebuked the wind and said to the water, "Peace, be still." Biblically, peace is a state of being. Everyone else in this story is in a state of storm. But Jesus simply extended the peace he already had to his environment. You see, peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of God. In his rebuke of the wind, Jesus is evoking the presence of God into the external atmospheric conditions, but also into the internal fear of the disciples. And it's here that Jesus gives us this incredible model for prayer. Invite peace into your situation. A lot of times we have difficult times and we say, God, take this situation away. Here's the deal. We live in a fallen world. Things are going to be bad a lot. The trick is not praying that God will take all of the difficulties away, because it's not going to happen until Christ returns and until we are in a new time. The prayer is to invite the peace of God into your situation. Extend the peace into your situation. To do that is to take authority over our circumstance. Is to be the arrow and not the target. Is to be proactive and not reactive in the way we live our lives. And then it says the wind stopped and there was great calm. Mark is reminding his readers that the same Christ who calmed the storm in Galilee can calm the storm in their troubled hearts. He asked them, "Why are you so afraid? You still don't have faith in me?" I bet the disciples felt pretty humbled. You see, the human soul cannot hold both faith and fear. They are mutually exclusive realms of existence. The more you have of one, the less you're going to have of the other. If you are filled with fear, there's not much room for faith. If you are filled with faith, there is not much room for fear. Fear, worry, and anxiety are predictable human responses to stressors. But they're more than that. They're also a lack of faith in Christ. Verse 41, and the disciples were filled with awe, and they said, "Who is this man that even the wind and waves obey him?" The story of the storm on the lake provided the perfect metaphor for those to whom Mark writes this gospel. Nero is persecuting Christianity, and Christianity is caught in a violent storm. Mark reminds the oppressed church that Jesus is with them in the storm. He is not fearful of the storm, and that he can calm the storm. So let me give you 4 quick thoughts as we close. A little straight up Jesus here. Number 1, we need to prioritize our spiritual health. One thing I've learned over the years, I love being a pastor, but if I died right now, they would bring someone in to take my place. They would sit behind my desk and they would open it and they would eat my mints. I am absolutely sure that this would happen. For me, knowing that I'm not indispensable frees me. It's awesome that I'm not all that in a bag of communion wafers. It is awesome. It is fantastic to know I'm just running my leg in what God wants to do. And when I'm done, I give that baton to someone else and boom, I'm going to get to rest, which is awesome because I'm tired already. And because I know it's not about me, I can take my vacations and I can take my day off and I can take time for rest and prayer and travel. And if Jesus took care of himself, he gives us permission to take care of ourselves as well. Number 2, we need to anticipate storms. Jesus told this story in Matthew about 2 houses, one built on rock and the other built on sand. The big idea is if you build on rock and the storm hits, your house will hold. But there is a sub-theme that I think is just as poignant. No matter where you build your house, storms are going to hit. They're just gonna hit. It's part of living in a fallen world. We are going to have storms. And being a person of faith doesn't give you a get out of pain card like we might hope to get in Monopoly. You see, a lot of people think if they attend church and pray and tithe and read their Bibles and try not to do too much wrong, then nothing bad's ever gonna happen. Here's the deal, storms hit everybody. So you anticipate them. Number 3, go to Jesus during the storm. The next time you are beside yourself with worry and anxiety, instead of getting on social media and squirting weak sauce all over the internet, why don't you just turn to Jesus and say, Jesus, is this all stressing you? And he's going to look at you and he's going to go, nope, it's not. You see, we need to stop getting upset about stuff that doesn't upset Jesus. I've found so many things in my life. I can get upset about them or I can not get upset about them, and it doesn't change a thing either way, so I might as well not get upset about them. You see, we can go to Jesus in the storm. He's not going anywhere. Number 4, let Jesus have the last word. Mark reminds his readers that when the waves die down and the storm ceases, we're going to feel really silly that we didn't have faith in Jesus. Think about all the times Jesus has come through in your life. Think about all the situations he's got you through. I always call it the Stub Toe Theory. You ever just crack your toe on something? You got to contain yourself because for the next 60 seconds, it hurts worse than anything in life. But 3 minutes from now, it's not going to hurt at all and you're going to feel like a total idiot. So you just don't want to scream and yell too much. You got to hold it in. And that's really what Jesus is telling us. When things are tough, don't scream and yell too much. Just hold it in because he's going to take care of it because he will have that last word. Faith is built by remembering God's faithfulness to us. And the more we remember that Jesus is faithful, the less likely we are to overreact. In 1633, the Dutch painter Rembrandt created a 5-foot by 4 feet work he called Storm on the Sea of Galilee. It was done with oil on a canvas. It's actually Rembrandt's only seascape. It's also a great art mystery because it was stolen in a gallery in Boston in 1990 and nobody knows where it is. The painting depicts Jesus and the 12 disciples in the storm, but because it's so big, a careful count, there ought to be 13 people, 12 disciples and Jesus, but there's 14 in the painting. There are 14 people on the vessel. And upon close inspection, you see it. Rembrandt added himself. I mean, he had a penchant to do self-portraits, but he put himself on the boat. And Rembrandt is actually looking right at us. Right at us. He's 3 over from Jesus. To the left, he's the guy looking at the viewer. Placing ourselves in the Jesus boat serves as a constant reminder that Jesus has the raging storm that you are facing right now under his control. He has it under his authority. Is there a tempest raging in your life? Are you having trouble just even hanging today because of all the stuff going on around you? Is there a tempest going on in the lives of people you know and love? Does everything seem out of control in this world? Does everything seem out of control in your world? Well, hear the words of Jesus. Peace, be still. Peace, be still. Now take a breath and exhale. Turn your eyes upon Jesus because Jesus gets the last word. Peace gets the last word, not fear. See, we're feeling better already. Would you pray with me? Great and mighty God, thank you that peace gets the last word. We receive your peace in the midst of our storm in the strong name of Jesus. Amen.